Good evening, sir. Good evening, classmates. Once again, I am Emma Villacorta, and together with me are Mom Camille Idolor and Sir Ralph Padayyuman, and I'm going to present our research critic paper on exploring the structure of science self-efficacy, a model built on high school students' conceptions of learning and approaches to learning science. Written by Chu Ji Liang in 2012. For the background of this study, so the author used science as a content domain in this study. It has two crucial academic constructs. First is the conceptions of learning, and the second is the approaches to learning. Now, the researcher used survey questionnaire to measure the conceptions of learning science, or the CLS. And here are the following. First, memorizing. Second, preparing for a test. Third, calculating and practicing tutorial problems. Fourth, increasing knowledge. Fifth, applying. Sixth, understanding. And seventh, seeing in a new way. And then another survey questionnaire was used to measure the approaches to learning science, to measure the deep motive, the deep strategy, the surface motive, and the surface strategy. And also, another survey was used to measure the self-efficacy of students in learning science. Moving on to the emphasis of this study, initially the researchers believed that student conceptions of learning science affect their approaches to learning science. Then, students' approaches to learning science were then expected to influence their self-efficacy in science. And finally, the study hypothesized that student approaches to learning science can arbitrate between their conception of learning science and self-efficacy in science. So let's move on to the results and discussion. Tables to compare data. We have here the descriptive statistics of the CLS, or the conceptions to learning science. So here are the data. Now to analyze this, let's go with the interpretation. It can be seen that they gain moderate scores on memorizing, testing and calculating and practicing, but relatively higher scores on increasing knowledge, application, understanding, and seeing in a new way. That means that students obtain higher scores in higher level of conceptions of learning than in the lower level of conceptions of learning in science. Now, with respect to the students' approaches to learning science, table 2 indicates that they had moderate scores of surface motive, surface strategy, and deep motive, whereas obtained rather higher scores on deep strategy. Then in table 3 shows that the students' scores in science self-efficacy were moderate in the 1 to 7 Likert scale. Next table, we have here the descriptive statistics of the ALS, or the approaches to learning science, and the descriptive statistics of the self-efficacy survey. So here are the data. So let's move on to the analysis. It shows that the students' lower level conceptions of learning science positively correlated to the surface motive and surface strategy. The correlations range from 0.06 to 0.59, but negatively correlated to the deep motive and deep strategy. The correlation range from negative 0.23 to negative 0.66. Now, in contrast, the higher level conceptions of learning science positively associated with the deep motive and deep strategy. The correlation ranges from 0.35 to 0.45, but negatively associated with The surface strategy of learning science, the correlations range from negative 0.22 to negative 0.35. Now, however, the relations between the higher level conceptions of learning science and the surface motive are rather weak and insignificant, except the one between seeing in a new way and surface motive. Next table, it shows here the correlations among the subscales of the CLS, the ALS, and the SSE. Okay, so here we have the memorizing, testing, calculating, and practicing, increasing knowledge, applying, understanding, seeing in a new way, and self-efficacy. And these are the approaches to learning: the depth motive, depth strategy, surface motive, surface strategy, and the self-efficacy. So let's go on with the analysis of the table. The student's science self-efficacy had a significant correlation with both their conceptions of learning and their approaches to learning in science. Regarding the correlations between the SSE and the CLS, while the student's science self-efficacy positively related to the higher level conceptions of learning science, the correlations range from 0.23 to 0.30. It also negatively related to the lower level conceptions of learning science. The correlations range from negative 0.24 to negative 0.47. Now, the correlations between the SSE and the ALS, the student science self-efficacy, positively correlated to the deep motive, deep strategy, and surface motive. The correlations range from 0.15 to 0.68, but negatively correlated to the surface strategy. The correlations was negative 0.34. So this figure is the built model, the structural model of the CLS, ALS, and SSE. Okay, so to interpret this model, it depicts the structural relationships among the students' conceptions of learning science, approaches to learning science, and science self-efficacy. The fit indices indicated that the hypothesis or that the hypothesized model adequately explained the data. In addition, the parameter estimates revealed that lower level conceptions had negative effects on both the deep motive and deep strategy, but had positive effects on the surface motive and surface strategy. In contrast, the higher level conceptions had positive effects on the deep motive, deep strategy, and surface motive, but had a negative effect on the surface strategy. Moreover, the deep motives, deep strategy, and surface motive exercise a positive effect on the science self-efficacy. So let's move on now to the critical evaluation of this study. For its strengths, the study has provided some strong theoretical and conceptual framework which can help in future research. Some constructs in the study are interrelated and contributory to the upcoming studies focusing on conceptions and misconceptions in learning science. The study thoroughly explains essential information in CLS and presents built-in strategies to enhance different learning approaches in science. Let's look at the weaknesses of this study. Though the study accomplished was informative in nature, weakness paves its way to radically improve the research. The CEM model built in this study limitedly presents a suggestion for designing an encouraging learning environment. Another set of variables must be tested to support the conclusions of the recent studies undertaken to enhance science self-efficacy and foster deep learning among students. So that's the end of our presentation. Thank you, sir, for listening, and thank you, classmates.